8,270. That is how many retail stores shut their doors in the United States in a single year. And here is the part that should stop you cold. 10 chains accounted for roughly 5,500 of them. 10. Two-thirds of every closure in the country came from a handful of names you have shopped at your entire life. This is not a broad, slow decline spread evenly across the landscape. This is a series of executions, specific companies, specific brands, going dark all at once, in bulk. And analysts are projecting nearly 7,900 more stores will close this year, with over 1,200 already announced before spring. I have 10 names for you, and these are not the ones everybody talks about. Number 5 on this list is a company that closed every single one of its locations, and it is owned by the richest retailer on the planet, which should tell you something terrifying about whether any of this can actually be fixed. Because if that company cannot make a physical store work with unlimited money and the best data on earth, what chance does anyone else have? Let me walk you through all 10. Number 10. GameStop is closing 470 stores across 43 states, and the product itself is evaporating. Let me start with a company that a lot of people wrote off years ago and then got confused about when it became a stock market story. Because the stock market story and the actual business story have almost nothing to do with each other, and the actual business story is brutal. GameStop is closing more than 470 locations across 43 states. That is on top of roughly 727 stores that came down in the prior year. As of early 2025, the chain had about 2,325 locations in this country. Do the arithmetic on that. They have taken out well over 1,000 stores in 2 years against a base of roughly 2,300. That is not trimming, that is amputation. And here is why this one is different from every other story on this list, and why I do not think there is any version of this that ends with GameStop surviving in its current form. Every other retailer on this list has a product that still exists. People still need shampoo. People still need car parts. People still eat pizza. The product is fine. The store is the problem. GameStop's product is disappearing. Think about what a GameStop actually sold. It sold physical copies of video games in plastic cases. And more importantly, it sold used physical copies of video games, which is where the actual money was, because the margin on a used game was enormous compared to a new one. That was the whole engine. You brought in your old games. They gave you $8 in store credit. They resold it for $35. That spread paid for the lease, the lights, and the kid behind the counter. Now go look at how anyone under 30 actually buys a game. They press a button on the console. It downloads, there is no disc, there is no case, there is nothing to trade in ever, because you never owned a physical object in the first place. The newest consoles are increasingly sold in versions that do not even have a disc drive, not as a limited edition. As the standard model, you cannot resell a download. There is no used market for a license. The single most profitable product category in the company's history was legislated out of existence by a change in file distribution, and nobody in that company had a plan for it, because there is no plan for it. And this is where I want you to notice something bigger, because GameStop is the clearest example of a category we are going to see repeatedly. It is the retailer whose entire reason for existing was solving a distribution problem that no longer exists. You went to GameStop because that is where the games physically were. Once the games stopped being physical, the store became a room with posters in it. Blockbuster was the same story. So was Tower Records. So was the camera store. So was the travel agency on Main Street. And the tragedy of it is that the stores tried. They pivoted to collectibles, to trading cards, to toys, to little plastic figurines of characters from shows. Walk into a GameStop now, and it looks like a gift shop that also sells some games. That pivot is not a strategy. It is a company looking for something, anything, that still requires you to physically walk through a door. Here is what I want you to take from this one. When you see a chain pivot away from the thing, its name literally describes, that is the tell. When GameStop stops being about games, when the bookstore is mostly candles, when the electronics store is mostly appliances, the company is telling you in the plainest possible language that its core business no longer supports its real estate. Watch for that pivot. It shows up in the store layout 18 months before it shows up in a bankruptcy filing. Number 9. Rite Aid closed. Roughly 1,240 stores and filed Chapter 11, twice in under 3 years. Now let me give you the single largest collapse in this entire cycle, and I want to be precise about the number because it is genuinely staggering. Rite Aid closed approximately 1,240 stores. 1,240 from one chain. And they did it after filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection for the second time on May 5, 2025, in the District of New Jersey. The second time, in under 3 years. A company does not file twice unless the first restructuring failed to fix anything, which means the first bankruptcy just bought time, cut some debt, and handed the same broken business back to itself. Rite Aid was the third of the big 3 American pharmacy chains. For generations, if you lived in the Northeast, in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, in California, there was a Rite Aid on your corner. It was where your parents filled their blood pressure medication. It was where you bought a birthday card at 9 at night because you forgot. It had a photo counter. It had a lunch counter in some of the old ones. And now, in enormous swaths of this country, it is simply gone. Here is the part that matters more than the retail story. And I need you to really sit with this one because it affects people's health, and almost nobody frames it correctly. When a drugstore closes, the community does not lose a store. It loses a healthcare access point. Researchers have a term for what gets created: a pharmacy desert. It is an area where getting a prescription filled requires a meaningful drive, and for a lot of Americans, that drive is not a minor inconvenience. If you are 78 years old and you no longer drive at night, if you do not have a car at all, if you are on a bus route that runs twice a day, if you are managing 3 chronic conditions and you need refills every month for the rest of your life, a 15 or 20-minute drive is not a scheduling issue. It is a barrier. And the research consistently shows that when the pharmacy gets further away, people take their medication less consistently. And when people take their blood pressure medication less consistently, they have strokes. When diabetics cannot reliably get insulin, they end up in emergency rooms. The cost does not disappear when the store closes. It moves. It shows up 18 months later in a hospital admission that costs the system 50 times what the prescription would have. Now, I want to be honest about something, because I think fairness makes this more useful. Rite Aid's collapse was not purely a story of a hostile economy. There was genuine mismanagement. There was a failed merger attempt. There was a debt load that made the company fragile long before the consumer got squeezed. There were opioid settlement liabilities. Plenty of this was self-inflicted. But here is why it still belongs on your radar. A company loaded with debt can survive a decent economy. It cannot survive a decent economy and a squeezed consumer and rising labor costs and reimbursement pressure all at once. The debt does not kill you. The debt removes your ability to absorb anything else going wrong. That is the pattern underneath almost every name on this list. These are not companies that got hit by one thing. They are companies that had no margin for error left when the second and third thing arrived. And here is your practical takeaway, and please actually do this one. If you or a family member fills prescriptions at a chain pharmacy, find out today where the nearest alternative is and how far it actually is. Not theoretically, actually. Then ask your prescribing physician about 90-day supplies, because a 90-day fill turns 12 trips a year into 4. And if your pharmacy does close, understand that your prescriptions do not automatically transfer. You have to initiate it, and the receiving pharmacy has to request the file. People have gone without medication for a week because they assumed the handoff was automatic. Number 8. Advance Auto Parts shut, 727 locations and 4 distribution centers in one restructuring. This next one flew almost entirely under the radar, and it tells you something profound about how American life has changed in a way nobody has really named. Advance Auto Parts executed a restructuring that closed 523 corporate stores, exited 204 independently owned CarQuest locations, and shut down 4 distribution centers. That is 727 store locations plus the logistics infrastructure behind them. The company had roughly 4,788 stores at the end of 2024. So they took out roughly 15% of the network in a single strategic retreat. Now, why does an auto parts chain shrink by 15%? Cars did not stop existing. Americans are actually driving older vehicles than they used to, and the average age of a car on American roads has been climbing for years. On the surface, an aging fleet should be the best thing that ever happened to an auto parts retailer. More old cars, more broken parts, more sales. So what happened? 2 things. And the second one is the one nobody talks about. The first is straightforward competition and execution. AutoZone and O'Reilly ate their lunch, particularly on the commercial side, selling to professional repair shops rather than to individuals. Advance had a distribution network that was less efficient, and in a business where a mechanic needs a part in 30 minutes or he loses the bay for the afternoon, logistics is the entire product. They lost on operations. But the second reason is the cultural one, and it is the one I want you to think about. Americans are losing the ability to fix their own cars, not the willingness, the ability, and it is not their fault. Think about what a car was in 1985. You pop the hood and you could see everything: the distributor, the carburetor, or the fuel injection, the belts, the plugs. A person with a socket set, a Chilton manual, and a Saturday afternoon could do a tune-up, change the brakes, swap an alternator. My father did all of it in a driveway. Millions of fathers did, and that is who Advance Auto Parts was built for. The guy in the driveway on Saturday with the hood up. Now pop the hood on a car built in the last 10 years. There is a plastic cover over the entire engine. Underneath that is a computer. The diagnostic requires a scan tool that talks to proprietary software. Half the systems will not reset without a dealer-level interface. Some manufacturers have made it so that replacing a headlight requires removing the bumper. There are components that will not function until they are electronically registered to the vehicle. The car became a sealed appliance, and when the product becomes unfixable by ordinary people, the store that sold parts to ordinary people loses its customer. This is the same dynamic that killed the craft economics we have all noticed. The do-it-yourself option used to be the cheap option. It was what you did when you could not afford to pay someone. Now, increasingly, doing it yourself is either impossible or requires an investment in tools and software that costs more than the repair. And that shift has a cost that lands hardest on exactly the people who can least afford it. If you are on a fixed income and your car needs work, the driveway repair that used to cost you $40 in parts now costs you $400 at a shop because the $40 option no longer exists. That is not inflation. That is the removal of an option. So here is the practical piece. Learn what you still can do, because it is not nothing. Air filters, cabin filters, wiper blades, batteries, and headlight bulbs on many vehicles are still entirely doable, and the markup at a shop on those items is substantial. Buy a basic OBD2 code reader, which now costs about $25, and plugs into a port under your dashboard, so that when the check engine light comes on, you walk into the shop knowing what the code is instead of finding out what they tell you it is. And find an independent mechanic and become a regular before you have an emergency, because the person who knows your face gives you a different answer than the person who does not. Number 7. Starbucks pulled the plug on roughly 520 North American locations. All right, here is the one that I think should genuinely unsettle you, because it breaks the story everybody tells themselves about why retail is dying. Starbucks closed approximately 520 locations across North America. Now stop and think about that for a second, because it does not fit the narrative. Starbucks is not a bankrupt company. It is not a mall relic. It is not selling a product that got digitized. It is not loaded with private equity debt. It is one of the most successful, most studied, most operationally sophisticated retail brands in the history of the world. They have data on everything. They know how long you wait. They know what you order in February versus July. They have models that predict store performance before a lease is signed. And they closed 520 stores. Here is what that tells you, and it is the most important thing in this entire video. The problem is not that these companies are stupid. Everybody wants the story to be about bad management. It is a comfortable story. It means the failure is somebody's fault and could have been avoided with better people. And sometimes that is genuinely part of it, as with Rite Aid's debt or Advance's logistics. But when the single most competent operator in the industry closes 500 stores, you are no longer looking at a management problem. You are looking at a math problem. And the math is this: the cost of operating a physical location in America has risen faster than what the American consumer is able or willing to spend inside it. Rent went up, labor went up, insurance went up, utilities went up, in some regions dramatically. Security costs went up. Meanwhile, the customer walking through the door has less real discretionary income than they had 5 years ago. You can be brilliant and still lose that equation. Competence does not repeal arithmetic. There is a second lesson in the Starbucks closures, and it is about a specific kind of mistake that shows up everywhere in this cycle: overbuilding. Starbucks spent years opening stores at a pace that put locations within a few blocks of each other, on the theory that convenience drives incremental visits. And in a growing discretionary economy, that works. Each new store finds enough new customers to justify itself. The moment the discretionary economy stops growing, the strategy inverts. Now the new store is not finding new customers. It is splitting the existing ones with the store 4 blocks away. Both locations are now marginal instead of one being strong. And when you have to close, you are closing stores that were profitable until you built the one next door. That is the story of American retail over the last 15 years in one sentence. We built for a customer who was going to keep spending more, and that customer stopped. And there is something else worth noticing about the coffee shop specifically, because it is not just a beverage business. The Starbucks in a lot of towns functioned as one of the last places a person could sit for an hour without buying much. It was where people worked, where they met, where the retired guys had coffee at 8 in the morning, where a job interview happened. Sociologists call those third places, meaning somewhere that is neither home nor work. We have been steadily losing them for decades, and when 520 of them close at once, a lot of communities lose the only one they had left. That is not a coffee problem. That is a loneliness problem, and we already have one of those. And I want to add one more thing about the Starbucks closures specifically, because there is a detail in how these decisions get made that applies to every chain on this list. The stores that close are almost never the worst stores in the country. They are the worst stores relative to their lease terms. A location doing perfectly respectable volume gets closed because its rent renewal came in 40% higher, while a weaker store 3 towns over survives because it is locked into a favorable lease signed in 2016 that runs another 6 years. Which means the map of what closes is not really a map of where business is bad. It is a map of which leases happen to come due in a bad year. That is why the closures look so random on the ground, why the busy store shuts and the quiet one stays, and why nothing you as a customer did or did not do necessarily had anything to do with it. I mention that because I have watched people take a local closure personally, as though the town failed the store. Usually the town had nothing to do with it. A lease expired at the wrong moment in the wrong interest rate environment, and a spreadsheet in another state returned a number. Number 6. Amazon is shutting down every single Amazon Fresh and Amazon Go store. Here is number 5, and this is the one I flagged at the top, because it is the single most damning data point in this entire video, and almost nobody connected the dots when it was announced. Amazon is closing all Amazon Fresh and Amazon Go locations. All of them. The company said it will convert some of those sites into Whole Foods Market stores. It is the end of the company's latest experiment in physical grocery retail. Sit with that. Amazon, the company that arguably caused more of this retail devastation than any other single force in modern history. The company with functionally unlimited capital, the most sophisticated logistics network ever constructed, and more data about American purchasing behavior than any organization that has ever existed, including the federal government. Amazon Go was supposed to be the future of retail. Do you remember the demonstrations? You walked in, scanned your phone, picked items off a shelf, and walked out. Hundreds of cameras and sensors tracked what you took and charged you automatically. No checkout, no line, no cashier. It was described as revolutionary, and honestly, standing in one of those stores, it felt revolutionary. And it did not work. Not technically. Technically it worked. It failed economically. Because the cost of building and maintaining a sensor-saturated ceiling, plus the rent, plus the staff you still needed for stocking and support, plus the shrinkage, could not be covered by what people spent on a sandwich and a drink. Here is why this matters so much more than it might seem. Every single company on this list is being told by analysts and consultants and business press that they failed because they did not innovate. They did not adapt. They did not embrace technology. Blockbuster should have been Netflix. Sears should have been Amazon. It is the standard sermon, and it has been repeated for 20 years. Amazon Go is the counterexample that breaks the sermon. It was the most technologically advanced retail concept ever attempted, built by the company that wrote the book on disruption, with no capital constraint whatsoever, and it closed, which means the problem is not innovation. The problem is that the economics of putting a box on a piece of American commercial real estate, staffing it, insuring it, powering it, and selling goods out of it at a margin has gotten genuinely difficult regardless of how clever you are. That should reframe how you think about every closure you see. When your local store shuts down and somebody says they just did not keep up with the times, remember that the company that defined the times could not make it work either. And there is one more layer here that I do not want you to miss. Amazon does not actually need physical stores. It never did. These were experiments funded by profits from cloud computing and e-commerce. Amazon can shut all of them tomorrow, and nothing about the company changes. But the town where that store was does change. The employees change. The tax base changes. The other businesses in that shopping center that relied on the foot traffic change. That is the asymmetry at the heart of all of this. For the corporation, a closure is a line item and a press release. For the community, it is a hole in the middle of a street that stays there for years. The decision is made in a room by people who will never drive past the building, and the consequences are absorbed entirely by people who had no vote in it. Number 5, Francesca is liquidating all 400 plus of its stores. Now we move into the total losses. not restructurings, not right-sizing, companies where the answer is zero. Francesca's, the women's clothing and accessories chain, is closing all of its United States locations, roughly 400 to 460 stores, as the company liquidates following a bankruptcy filing. All of them. There is no reorganized Francesca's with a leaner footprint. There is a liquidation, which means the inventory gets sold at whatever it brings, the fixtures get auctioned, the leases get rejected or sold, and the corporate entity is dissolved. And here is why I include what looks like a mid-sized boutique chain on a list with Amazon and Starbucks. Because Francesca's is the perfect specimen of a category that is being wiped out completely, and understanding that category will help you predict the next dozen closures before they are announced. Francesca's was a mall boutique, not a big box anchor, not a discounter. A small format store, typically 1,800 square feet, selling moderately priced women's apparel, jewelry, and gift items with a curated boutique feel. The whole proposition was discovery. You wandered in without a specific need and found something you liked. That business model has 3 requirements, and all 3 have been removed. It requires mall foot traffic, which requires anchors, which are the department stores that are themselves closing. Every anchor that goes dark takes the boutiques in that wing with it, usually within 18 months. The boutique never failed on its own merits. It starved because the thing that brought people to the building left. It requires discretionary spending on non-essential purchases. That is the definition of what it sold. Nobody needs a decorative candle and a statement necklace. Those are the first 2 lines eliminated from a household budget under pressure, and they are eliminated instantly and completely, not gradually. And it requires that discovery happen in a physical space. That is the one that got fully replaced. Discovery moved to a phone. The algorithm now does what the browsing experience used to do, and it does it while you are lying in bed for free, without gas money or parking. Remove foot traffic, remove discretionary income, and remove the discovery function, and there is nothing left. Not a weakened version of the business, nothing. Now, here is the piece that I think about with these particular closures. Chains like this were disproportionately staffed by women, frequently part-time, frequently in exactly the demographics that have the fewest employment alternatives in a given town. When 400 of these stores close, you are not laying off 400 people, you are laying off somewhere in the range of 4,000 to 6,000. Most of them part-time, most of them with no severance and no benefits to lose because they never had any, and those jobs do not reappear. That is the thing nobody says clearly enough. When a boutique closes in a mall, in a town of 40,000 people, the retail management job with a small commission structure does not get replaced by anything. The person goes to a warehouse or to a gig platform, or out of the workforce. We keep describing this as retail transformation, as though something is transforming into something else. In a lot of these towns, nothing is on the other side of the transformation. There is just less. Number 4. Eddie Bauer is closing all 175 stores in the United States and Canada. This one hurts, and if you are over 50, it is going to hurt more than most of the names on this list, because Eddie Bauer is not a mall concept somebody dreamed up in 1998. It is a piece of American history. Eddie Bauer filed for bankruptcy and announced that all 175 of its stores in the United States and Canada will close by April 30th, 2026, unless a buyer steps in. The company was founded in Seattle in 1920. Eddie Bauer himself patented the quilted down jacket in the 1930s after nearly dying of hypothermia on a fishing trip. His gear went to American troops in the Second World War. It went on expeditions. The first American ascent of Everest wore his down. This was a genuine outfitter, a real company that made real equipment for people who went outside in serious conditions. And now it is 175 leases and a logo. The path from there to here is a specific and repeated American story. And I want to name it because you will see it again. The brand got bought and sold repeatedly. It passed through conglomerates, through a catalog company, through bankruptcies, through private equity. And each successive owner did what owners do with a heritage brand. They extracted the value of the name. They pushed the product down market to raise volume. They licensed the name onto things Eddie Bauer never made. They cut the quality of the materials because the customer would buy on the strength of the reputation for a while before they noticed. That is the play. And it works, right up until it does not. You can coast on a reputation for roughly a generation. The people who remember when the parka was genuinely the best parka keep buying, because they trust the label, and then those customers age out, and their children have no attachment to a name that, in their experience, has always been a mid-tier mall store selling fleece. The brand equity was real. It was built over 80 years by making excellent things, and it was spent by a series of owners in about 25, none of whom built any of it. Meanwhile, the actual outdoor market did not disappear. It is thriving, but it went two directions, and Eddie Bauer was standing in the middle. At the top, brands that never compromised on the technical product and charge accordingly. At the bottom, extremely cheap functional gear from mass retailers and direct-to-consumer brands. The middle, which is where a 175-store mall-adjacent chain lives, evaporated. That is the exact same middle that has vanished everywhere else in this economy. Not too cheap, not too nice, just fine. Just reasonable. That entire segment has been hollowed out because the customer who could comfortably afford just fine has been squeezed into buying cheap, while the customer above them buys the real thing. And here is the practical note. Because a lot of you will see the liquidation signs. When a chain liquidates, the early sales are usually the worst deals because the discounts are shallow and the liquidators are testing price. The real markdowns come in the final weeks. But understand that all sales are final. Gift cards frequently become worthless at some point in the process, and warranties are generally not honored by anyone once the corporate entity dissolves. If you are buying a $200 coat at 70% off, you are buying it with no returns and no warranty. Sometimes that is still a good deal. Just know what you are actually agreeing to. Number 3. Claire's filed for bankruptcy, again, and is carrying an enormous debt load. Claire's has filed for bankruptcy again, second time in 7 years, and they are closing roughly 300 locations, including about 235 Claire's stores and 56 of their icing locations. Reporting has put the company's debt burden in the billions. Now, if you are over 50, Claire's might not be a store you have set foot in for decades. But I guarantee you have stood outside one. Because Claire's is where a couple of generations of American girls got their ears pierced. It was a rite of passage. Your daughter turned 8 or 10 or 12, and you stood there in the mall while a 19-year-old with a piercing gun did it. And there was a little stuffed animal to hold. And it took 4 minutes, and it was a memory. And now, in a lot of malls, that is gone. But I want to use Claire's to explain something structural that applies to almost every failing retailer on this list, and it is the thing that most people genuinely do not understand about why these companies die. It is usually not the sales, it is the debt. Here is how it works. A private equity firm buys a retail chain. To buy it, they borrow a large amount of money. Then, and this is the part that surprises people, the debt used to buy the company is placed on the company itself. The retailer now owes the money that was borrowed to purchase the retailer. That company now has to generate enough cash every single quarter to service that debt before it pays for anything else, before store maintenance, before technology upgrades, before employee raises, before inventory investment. So what gets cut? Store maintenance, technology, wages, inventory. And you can see it when you walk in. You have all seen it. The dim lighting, the worn carpet, the 2 employees running a store that needs 6, the merchandise that has clearly been sitting there since last season. That is not laziness. That is a company that physically cannot spend money on its stores because the interest payment comes first. Then the consumer notices the store is unpleasant. Sales decline, which makes the debt harder to service, which forces more cuts, which makes the store worse. That loop, and it is a genuine loop, is how a functioning retailer becomes a bankruptcy filing over about 5 years. And in the meantime, the fees, the dividends, and the management payments have generally already been extracted by the owners. So by the time the thing collapses, the people who loaded it with debt have frequently already gotten their money out. The losses land on lenders, on suppliers who never got paid for the last shipment, and on employees who lose jobs and get nothing. I want to be careful and fair here. Not every private equity retail deal ends this way, and some owners genuinely do invest and improve operations. But the leveraged buyout has been an enormous contributor to this specific wave of retail failures, and it almost never gets mentioned in the coverage. The story you get is Amazon and changing consumer habits. The balance sheet is doing at least as much of the killing. So when you see a beloved store looking neglected, do not assume the company is broke in the sense of having no customers. Very often the stores are still generating cash. The cash is just going somewhere other than the store. Number 2. Pizza Hut is closing 250 locations, and the dine-in restaurant is disappearing with it. Pizza Hut's parent company reviewed the business and determined that 250 underperforming locations would close, following declining sales. And I want to spend some time on this one, because the restaurant closures in this cycle are telling us something about American family life that the retail closures are not. For a lot of you watching this, Pizza Hut was not a place you ordered from. It was a place you went. There was a building with a red roof. There were the dark wood booths and the red plastic cups and the stained glass lamps hanging over the table. There was a salad bar. There was a jukebox in some of them. There was the Book It program, where if you read enough books you got a personal pan pizza and a sticker, and an entire generation of American kids learned to read partly because of a pizza chain. That was a destination. A family got in the car and went somewhere and sat down together for an hour. Now go look at what a Pizza Hut is today in most of the country. It is a counter in a strip mall with 2 chairs nobody sits in. The dining room is gone. The whole building has been reconfigured around one function, which is handing a box to a driver. And here is what that transition actually represents. The economics of a sit-down family meal at a mid-price chain stopped working from both directions at once. From the restaurant side, a dining room requires square footage you pay rent on, servers you pay wages to, restrooms you maintain, and tables that turn maybe twice on a weeknight. The delivery model needs a kitchen, a counter, and a fraction of the space. When labor costs rise and margins compress, the dining room is the first thing management eliminates because it is the least productive square footage in the building. From the family's side, a sit-down dinner for 4 at a place like that is now realistically $60 to $80 with drinks and tip. Ordering 2 pizzas for delivery is $35. And when a household is running a 2.6% savings rate, the $35 version is the only version that happens. So both parties independently optimized their way out of the shared meal, and neither of them decided to end it. It just ended. And what is lost is not pizza. Pizza is fine. Pizza is more available than it has ever been in human history. What is lost is the occasion. The reason to leave the house together. The hour where everybody is at the same table without a television. I think about that a lot with these restaurant closures, because we have been documenting a loneliness epidemic in this country, and we keep looking for the cause in phones and social media. Some of it is that, but some of it is that we have quietly dismantled the physical infrastructure where ordinary people used to be around each other. The diner, the lunch counter, the family restaurant with the booths. Nobody voted to remove those. They were removed by rent, wages, and a squeezed household budget. One location at a time, in decisions made on spreadsheets, and the delivery economy that replaced it has a cost nobody puts on the receipt. When you order through an app, the restaurant frequently pays 15 to 30% of that ticket to a platform. So the local pizza place you are trying to support is netting substantially less from your app order than from the same order placed by phone for pickup. If you want to actually help a local restaurant survive, call them directly and pick it up. It is a genuinely meaningful difference to their margin, and it costs you nothing but the drive. Number 1. Kroger is closing 60 stores, which means even groceries are not safe. And here is number 1, and I put it last because it breaks the last comfortable assumption anybody has about this whole subject. Kroger announced it would close 60 locations nationwide over an 18-month span. Roughly 39 of those were closed or slated to close in the first year, leaving another 21 or so to come. Kroger operates more than 1,200 grocery stores across 16 states. Now, 60 stores out of 1,200 is not an existential threat to Kroger, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. Kroger is not going away, but that is exactly why this one belongs at number 1, and here is the reasoning. Groceries were supposed to be the safe category. That was the entire thesis. Everything else could be disrupted, digitized, delivered, or done without. But people have to eat, and they have to eat every week forever, regardless of the economy. Grocery was the fortress. Analysts described it as recession-resistant for decades, and they were largely right. So when the fortress starts closing doors, you have to update your model of what is happening, and there are real reasons behind it. The company has been closing stores while trying to focus resources on the core business and improve operational efficiency. In the aftermath of a $25 billion merger with Albertsons that collapsed in December of 2024. When a merger of that scale falls apart, the strategy built around it falls apart too, and what follows is always a retrenchment. But look at the broader environment those closures are happening in. Grocery margins are famously thin, historically in the low single digits. That means a grocery store has almost no cushion. A modest increase in labor cost or shrink, or utilities or insurance flips a location from marginally profitable to losing money. There is no fat to cut, because there was never any fat. And now stack on the thing we have been discussing all the way through this video. The customer walking in has less to spend. They are trading down to store brands. They are buying smaller quantities. They are skipping the higher margin center store items, the snacks and the prepared foods and the impulse buys at the register, which is where a grocery store actually makes its money. The basket is shrinking and shifting toward the lowest margin items in the building. A grocery store can survive selling less. It cannot easily survive selling a less profitable mix forever at a fixed cost base. And when a grocery store closes, the consequence is the most serious one on this entire list. Everything else we have talked about is an inconvenience or a loss of something pleasant. This one creates a food desert. In rural counties and in lower-income urban neighborhoods, the closure of the single full-service grocery store means the nearest fresh produce is now 20 or 30 minutes away, and what fills the gap is a convenience store or a dollar store selling shelf-stable packaged food at a higher price per calorie and a much worse nutritional profile. That is not a shopping problem. That is a public health outcome, measurable in diabetes rates and cardiovascular disease, and it takes about a decade to show up in the data. So here is what I would actually do with this information, and this is the practical close. Find out today whether your grocery store is owned by a chain that has announced closures and know where your second option is. Not vaguely, actually know the drive. If you are in a small town with one grocery store, understand that store is more fragile than you think, and shop it, because the closures come to the locations with the weakest sales. And in a small market, that decision can genuinely be influenced at the margin by whether local people use it or drive to the big store 40 minutes away. Learn what actually keeps rice, dried beans, oats, pasta, canned proteins, and shelf-stable staples let you get through a stretch without a grocery run, and they are the cheapest calories in the store by a wide margin. And if you have a neighbor who does not drive, particularly an older one, find out how they get groceries. Because when a store closes, they are the first person it happens to, and they are the last person anyone thinks about. What connects all 10 of these, and the one thing nobody is telling you? Let me pull all 10 of these together now, because the individual stories are interesting and the pattern is what actually matters. Total store closures in the United States came to 8,270 in a single year. That was actually down from 8,825 the year before, and 9,700 in 2020. Analysts project roughly 7,900 closures for this year, with more than 1,200 already publicly announced early in the year, and that number expected to grow as companies finalize lease decisions. But here is the statistic that reframes everything, and I have not heard anyone say it plainly. The top 10 chains alone accounted for roughly 5,500 of those 8,270 closures. About two-thirds of every store closure in America came from 10 companies. One analysis put it in exactly the right words. That is concentration, not collapse. And I want to be honest with you about what that means, because I could easily stand here and tell you the sky is falling and it would get more clicks. But you deserve the accurate version. The accurate version is that American retail is not evenly dying. It is being violently sorted. A handful of over-leveraged, overbuilt, structurally obsolete chains are being liquidated in bulk, and their square footage is being redistributed to whoever can actually make the economics work. Aldi is opening stores, discounters are opening stores, fitness studios are opening, fast casual restaurant chains are expanding aggressively, and here is the genuinely counterintuitive fact that almost nobody knows. Because so little new retail construction has happened, because higher labor costs and elevated interest rates have made building new strip malls unattractive, the industry is actually looking at a shortage of quality retail space toward the end of this decade. One industry executive described it as a world of dwindling supply and flagged 2029 and 2030 as the problem years. Think about that. We are simultaneously closing thousands of stores and running out of good retail space. Those two facts sound contradictory, and they are both true. Because the space being vacated is largely in locations and formats nobody wants, while the space anyone actually wants is not being built. So what does that mean for you, sitting there watching this? It means do not interpret every empty storefront as proof that the whole system is failing. Some of it is genuinely a healthy market clearing out businesses that should have closed a decade ago, but it also means something harder, and this is the part one wants you to hold on to. Every single one of these 10 closures represents a real transfer. A transfer of jobs from a place to nowhere. A transfer of convenience from a neighborhood to a warehouse 200 miles away. A transfer of tax base from a town to a corporate entity in another state. A transfer of a place where people used to see each other into a screen where they do not. And the people absorbing those transfers are never the people making the decisions. So here is what I would actually do with this, and I will keep it short. If you work for a chain retailer, look up whether your company has announced closures, and if it has, update your resume this month rather than after the sign goes in the window. Liquidations move faster than people expect, and severance in a Chapter 7 is frequently nothing at all. If you hold gift cards or store credit for any struggling chain, spend them. In a bankruptcy, gift card holders are unsecured creditors, which is a polite way of saying you are at the back of a very long line and you will likely get nothing. If you shop somewhere you would genuinely miss, understand that your habits are the vote. There is no other election for this. The store that closes is the one with the weakest sales, and in a small market, local people showing up genuinely moves that number. And if you are just watching your town change and wondering what happened, know that you are not imagining it, and know that it was not caused by anything you did. It was caused by debt structures, by overbuilding during a cheap money era that ended, and by a consumer who ran out of room. Those are real, documented, structural forces, and no amount of shopping local was ever going to stop a leveraged buyout in a room in New York. What you can control is smaller than that, and it still matters. Know your alternatives before you need them. Know where the nearest pharmacy and grocery actually are. Keep some depth in your pantry, and check on the people in your neighborhood who lose the most when a store goes dark, because they are always the last ones anyone thinks about and the first ones it happens to. Take care of yourselves out there.